Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. Long time no speak for me actually speaking on the camera, other than maybe 1 or 2 videos quite recently. A couple of days ago I had a message from someone over on Instagram who has been watching my geography videos and would like some help with answering a 20-mark question. I've also had one of my school friends message me and ask the same thing, and so I thought I'd film a video. This is going to be the 12 and 20-mark questions. This is specifically for the Edexcel specification because that's all I know. I'm afraid, because that's the exam board I did myself, but I'm sure this is applicable for other exam boards as well. If it is helpful, do subscribe down below. I hope your exams or your revision is going well for your exams coming up. I'm going to try and get as many of the other videos out as I can, but please do bear with. It is dissertation writing season, and so naturally I'm quite busy because I graduate this year. So yeah, I am going to break this down into the structure of the things, what the mark scheme says, the difference between AO1 and AO2, what a PEEL paragraph is, and then what to do in the exam, evaluative language, and how to assess a question. And I think that's what I'm going to break it down into. So yeah, subscribe down below, make sure you don't miss the rest of the geography revision videos that are coming out soon, and let's get into this. So let's have a look at the structure. For a 12-mark question, it is an assess question and should take about 18 minutes to answer in the exam. Firstly, you start by defining the terminology within the question and then link them together to introduce what you're going to be writing about. So let's say your question is all about assessing the role of central government in regeneration. You define what central government is and you define what regeneration is as your assess question. Then secondly, you will say what this essay or what your answer is going to discuss. So you need to link all of them together and introduce your paper, introduce your answer. Okay, and then we move on to what I'm guessing you have known as PEEL paragraphs. If you haven't, these are just like the main paragraphs within your argument. Point, evidence, explain, evaluate and link. For the 12-mark question, you will do 3 PEEL paragraphs, an introduction, 3 paragraphs and a conclusion. Firstly, you've got your point, then you explain your point, then you've got your evidence to support it, then you've got to evaluate that and then link it back to your question. You need to do that for all of your answers, for all of your PEEL paragraphs. And then next part of the structure is your conclusion. The assess is coming up with most or least significant usually, or most or least important. That's what your assessment is, which is the most important point, which is the most important thing within that exam question. So you'll have your introduction, your 3 PEEL paragraphs, all linking back to the question. So at the end of each of your paragraphs, you need to link it back to the question. So assessing it, is this an important factor? Is this not an important factor? What scale of importance is there? Is it the most important factor? Is it the least important factor? Is it a somewhat important factor? And then in your conclusion, you are going to explicitly write about kind of your final paragraph, your linking bit, the final part of each of your paragraphs. What is the most important and least important, or most significant and least significant factor in your discussion? And you need to come up with a conclusion that supports all of that. You don't need the evidence as much, but you need to be able to explain why one is more important than the other, because until that point you had just been discussing why it's an important factor or why it's not an important factor, whereas your conclusion is kind of weighing them up against each other. So which is the most important factor and why? Then looking at the structure of a 20-mark question. This is slightly different. This is an evaluate question and should take about 30 minutes in the exam. To start with, you'll again define your key terminology from the question and then link that together to introduce the answer that you're going to discuss. Then again, for this, you will have PEEL paragraphs. So 3, 4 or 5 PEEL paragraphs. I'd go with 4 so that they're kind of well thought out. This is for your 20-mark question. So again, you need your point. You need to be able to explain your point. That's point 2. Evidence to support what point it is. Evaluate that as a factor and then link it back to your question. So yeah, you need to do that for all of them. Point, explain, evidence, evaluate and link. Point, evidence, explain, evaluate, link. There you go. So that's your 5 points of PEEL paragraphs. So you will need to do 4 or 5 PEEL paragraphs depending on time constraints, how many ideas and thoughts you have. And then again, you'll come to your conclusion. At the end, where you've linked it back to the question in each of your PEEL paragraphs, this is where you take that and link it back and compare them between. So in your PEEL paragraphs, you're going to be linking it back to the original question, which is the most or least successful, which is the most, has the most or least value. You will essentially say at the end of each PEEL paragraph, this has significant value, this has very little value to my question. Whereas in your conclusion, you weigh them up against each other. Point 1 is more successful than point 2 because there's more central government funding or something like that. You need to give a reason for why. Then looking at your mark scheme. So for the 12 and 20 mark questions, the exam mark scheme is fairly similar, and it breaks it down into AO1 and AO2. So AO1, this is showing that you understand the content within the question. So if it's all about regeneration, it requires that you know stuff about regeneration, which is why you revise. This AO1 is all about subject knowledge. However, all the information you are giving needs to be relevant to the question and have a purpose. It doesn't just be like regeneration information in general, it needs to be specific regeneration information to help you answer the question. Do you get the difference? You're going to use that evidence to support your answer. So you remember in your PEEL paragraphs, you want your evidence, yeah, this is the same evidence that you get in AO1 to support your answer. It's not just random facts about regeneration, it's evidence to support what you're saying. And then AO2, which is the majority of your work. It's probably 60 to 80% of what you're writing is AO2, which in the exam mark scheme it says applied knowledge and understanding of geographical information or ideas that make logical and relevant connections. The points aren't just separate to one another and there's coherence between them. There's a reason, which is why you have the last part of your PEEL paragraph, the linking, links back to the question, and then a conclusion brings it all together. There's a coherence between all of the things that you're saying. Also, all of your points need to be fully explained and supported with evidence, and all parts of the question need to be addressed. You can't just forget about some part of the question. So, for example, if it's evaluate the extent to which central government funding supports rural regeneration, you'll say it does because of central government funding. You could also talk about the EU Objective 1, which isn't central government, but it is an international government. You've also got like local governments, and so do they play more of a role than the central government? You could also talk about how, think about Cornwall for example, you've got, I think it's Gordon Ramsay's, or is it Gordon Ramsay? Or like one of the famous chefs have their restaurant down there to bring more tourists down there. That's individual, that is not central government funding. So you'd evaluate their role within that like rural regeneration scheme. Is it the most important? Is it the least important? Who has the most influence in that? That's what I mean when you say it needs to be fully supported, and you need to address all parts of the question. If you just talk about central government funding in that example, unless you've got loads of points to back it up, it kind of doesn't give a very well-rounded argument. You're just arguing from one perspective rather than talking about different stakeholders and who is involved with that. And then moving on to a conclusion, it needs to reflect the rest of your answer. If your conclusion doesn't link to what you said, pointless. You are judging the importance and significance of every paragraph, not just in the conclusion. So in your linking back, this is the most important factor within central government. Central government funding is the most important factor in rural regeneration because X, Y, Z. Or you've discussed that in your paragraph, and then the final line may be, therefore central government funding is one of the most important factors in rural regeneration. Next point. Because of what I've said about EU Objective 1 funding, central government funding actually isn't the most important factor because of this. And then in your conclusion, you're bringing all that together and weighing them up against one another. And it goes without saying that all your points need to be full and finished. You can't kind of leave anything half done. You want a fully supported answer with everything that you have to say in it. Focus again on the PEEL paragraph. You need to answer these questions in each part of your paragraph. What's your point? What's your evidence? And how will you evaluate or assess this, depending on if it's an evaluate question, it's your 20 mark. If it's your assess question, it's your 12 mark. So in the exam, how do we remember to do all this? Because I appreciate it's quite a lot to think about. So in your exam, step 1, you've probably heard this from your teacher in school, bug the question. What does that mean, Lara? What does it mean by bug the question? So get your question, box the command word if it's assess or if it's evaluate, because they mean two very different things. Evaluate is in relation to everything else. Assess is talking about it in itself. Underline, box the keywords in the question. So if it's talking about central government, underline central government. If it's talking about regeneration, underline that. If it's talking about rural regeneration, they go together. Box that. So you've got your command word and then you know exactly what you're talking about. And then glance over the question and make sure you know if it's a 12 mark or a 20 mark, because that depends on how many PEEL paragraphs you're writing and the time limit. 18 minutes for a 12 mark, 30 minutes for a 20 mark. Step 2, annotate the question. What does the command word want you to do? If it's assessment, you are weighing it up on its own. So think about the question, assess the role of central government in regeneration. Assess, you are always talking about central government, looking at central government itself, whereas an evaluate their role within rural regeneration, for example, it's the government versus other things. Evaluate is versus other things, assess is in itself, which is why it's a smaller mark question, because there's not always as much to say. What structure do you want to apply? You want your PEEL paragraphs, don't forget that. And then what do you know about the important words in the question? Definitions, case studies, examples that could be used. My best piece of advice is when you open an exam paper, go through, find the 12 mark, find the 20 mark, because that's usually when you've got the most knowledge in your brain, and spend 5-10 minutes at the start of your exam kind of writing down as much as you know that might be relevant to that question at the start, and then go back and start the paper. So then you're not trying to think to remember those key pieces of information or case studies or facts or figures that you think might be relevant later, because they're already written down on a page. Not in your kind of writing bit, but next to it or on a scrap piece of paper. That's always what I did in the exam, and then when I turned to it, it kind of jogged my memory and I didn't have to sit and think about it. It will take 10 minutes of your time, so if you're a slow writer, that is something you're going to have to be willing to sacrifice. But for me, I knew that I was quite quick at writing. I could always make the time up again. And to me, it made more sense to go and get the stuff down on a page. Just the kind of notes, annotating. It's a mess. No one marks it. But it was really helpful for myself to kind of have it on paper and then almost forget about it for an hour or so. That's my best piece of advice for you. Step 3, what's missing? Is there anything missing from the question once you've written your answer that you think will be relevant to answering it? So if you've got time, once you've written everything, go back, read your question, see if you have done the annotation thing at the start, see if you've missed any points, see if there's anything at the end of your paper when you're reading through everything that jumps out at you that you've completely forgotten. If it does and you've not got enough time, it's fine, don't stress. But if you have got the time, go back, add something at the bottom, asterisk it and then add it in. You are allowed to do that in an exam. And then step 4/5, paragraph themes and conclusion. There should be a theme or purpose to each of your main paragraphs. So each of your points should be different, obviously, and that will be kind of your theme for the paragraph. Is it appropriate to theme your paragraphs around different categories, so like human or physical or stakeholders or local or global or physical processes or environmental or social or environmental or economic or political, or, you know what I mean? So if you're talking about any topic, what does it split into? Does it split into scale? Does it split into socio-economic, environmental, political categories? Because that's a really easy way to break up your answer. And then where are you going? What are you trying to achieve? What final outcome are you trying to achieve? Yeah, it's usually helpful. If you can, it's quite an academic style of writing. In your introduction, say, the following discussion will reach the conclusion that central government funding is the most significant to rural regeneration, for example. And then all of your points will come you'll have to kind of say that throughout. So if your EU objective 1, say it is successful and it is relevant, but then in your conclusion it'll be EU objective 1 is not quite as significant as central government funding, and then you have to support that. But it is a very academic way of writing. It kind of sets you up, knowing what you're writing. You're not kind of going off on a tangent, because you always are then coming back to that. And it's a really, it's a high level style of writing. I did it during my A-levels. One of my teachers mentioned it to me, and yeah, I think it definitely helped. So if you can do that, I'd try practicing it first before you go into an exam. If you've got kind of a few hours to write questions and answers and things like that, I'd do that. During my A-levels, I'm just going off on a bit of a tangent here, but some of my best revision was to get an exam question on a flashcard. So, for example, we're going to go back to this again. Assess the role of central government in regeneration, 12-mark question on a flashcard. And then on the other side, I would write some of the points that I'd put in for that, and then the evidence that kind of links with that, because that's generally what you're memorising. When you're revising, you're memorising the evidence that supports your answers. Evaluation, to me, came a lot more naturally. Once I had the evidence on the paper, I could evaluate it quite easily. If you struggle to evaluate that, put that on the flashcard as well, and get your parents or your classmates to test you on that. That was a really good way that I helped, or that helped me revise, definitely, because that's what it's about. Yeah, it's important to know all these facts and figures about case studies, but usually you only have to have a few to support it, and they've got to be relevant. So working from an exam question out usually worked better for me than trying to fit all the knowledge I tried to remember into an exam question, if you get what I mean. It's definitely very helpful. So yeah, past papers, even if you're not writing everything out, get them on tiny little flashcards, put maximum 200 words on there, and kind of go through them on each of the main themes, each of the main topics, and then you've kind of covered all bases. That worked quite well. Back to the 20-mark evaluation questions. So, evaluative language. So, I'm going to put this on screen. I found this on a geography Twitter page. I cannot take credit for this at all, but to what extent you agree or disagree, you'll see at the top you've got the arrow from like 0% agree and like 100% agree, or like disagree and agree kind of thing. And then the words that you use, that how far do you agree? You totally agree? Do you strongly agree? Are you kind of undecided? Do you slightly agree, or do you not agree at all? Same, how important is it? It's extremely important, very, quite, it has minor importance. And then again, what impact? Has it got huge significance? It's very significant, it's moderately significant, it's partially significant, or it has no significance. So this is the kind of evaluative language that you want to be using through your answers. Again, it says this person is they've got a high level of writing skill. This is what you had to do at university, it's what you had to do at life, in life I should say. But yeah, here's some more sentence starters for you. It is significant because it proves or disproves. It is of equal importance. It's insignificant. It's limited because it's problematic or questionable or invalid. The short-term impacts versus the long-term impacts. Despite this, they're kind of the evaluative languages that you want to be using. It's comparing one thing to another. It's coming up with a conclusion based on what you're saying, and because of the time constraints, you do want to have a thought about these like examples of evaluative language. Yeah, that's definitely very helpful. PEEL paragraphs. I'm going to go back to this because it's so important that you get it. These are the questions that, if you can just jot them down as I'm saying, these are the questions that will be the most helpful. If you're writing a PEEL paragraph before the exam, just write these questions down and make sure each of your paragraphs has an answer to these questions, if you got what I mean. Firstly, your point. How significant is the factor that you're about to discuss? And then in your ease, your development, create an argument about a factor. Why is it significant? What is its impact? Why is it more or less significant than other factors? The advantages and disadvantages, a case study, and have you used any facts, figures or data? And then finally, linking it. Link it back to the question Reword the question to show that this paragraph does in fact answer it. Then to your 12-mark assess question. How do you write it? You make explicit judgments about the significance of factors or statements, and you need to weigh them up from the most significant to the least significant. Build an argument to support each factor and viewpoint. Introduction, you define your terminology, you understand what is the issue being addressed here and write about the context of the question, some short reference to the factors that you'll address and respond. This essay is going to discuss social, economic, political and environmental factors regarding rural regeneration, for example. That's all you need at the start, but it sets it out. It says, if you've ever read an academic paper, they usually have an abstract, or your introduction is essentially just introducing what you're going to say. So just write what you're going to say in very, very, very brief terms. Each theme of each paragraph, maybe mention that in your introduction. Your main body. Think about how relevant the statement or factor involved in the statement are. How relevant is it? How significant is it to the topic that you're studying? Get your evidence and build it up to support that point, and then make sure you keep linking it back to the question. Very similar to the other PEEL paragraphs of your evaluative question. You want to assess to what extent is it true, what are the strongest arguments, why is it the strongest, are all aspects of this question true, can you break it up into different components? You're assessing the impact, are the impacts good or bad, what are the most significant impacts, what are the impacts and are they the same for everyone, will this be the same in the future? If you're assessing the view, is the view correct? Are the most important arguments for the view being correct? What are they? Why are they there? Will everyone agree and has this changed over time? If you're assessing the reasons, if you're assessing the reasons, what are the most important reasons for something? Do the reasons change depending on variables like different countries or different time periods or different like climatic factors? And how has this changed or will it change in the future? And then assessing the role and influence. What players or stakeholders play the largest role in something? Does anything else play an important role, and how has this or will this change in the future? Your 3 paragraphs. How to. The first paragraph, I'd say, have your most significant factor or piece of evidence to support what's being asked in the question. How does it help to support this? Are there any negatives? Have you used any evidence? Link back to your question. Have you actually answered it? And use the wording of the question in your answer. And again, break it down. Second part, another significant factor, and then your third paragraph for your assessed questions, your third and final paragraph, the least significant factor. So, to summarise everything that I've just said, your 12-mark questions take 18 minutes in the exam paper. Don't give yourself too much more than that. You have PEEL paragraphs, you have your introduction, 3 PEEL paragraphs and your conclusion. Assessing is weighing up the factor on its own, not in comparison to anything else, just other factors within that umbrella. So assess the role of central government in regeneration. You could talk about affordable housing, you could talk about infrastructure, you could talk about regeneration schemes that they put in place, that kind of thing. Which is the most important factor? You kind of do your most important factor first and go through. Your conclusion links everything together. Do not forget to link everything together in your conclusion. Use the words of the question in your main paragraphs, in your conclusion, and it just kind of sets it out well. And then finally, your 20-mark questions take about 30 minutes in the exam. Don't go too long, don't go too short. 4 or 5 PEEL paragraphs, your introduction, 1, 2, 3, 4 PEEL paragraphs, and your conclusion. That is it. Again, you are evaluating that factor in comparison to other things. So central government or international government, or the role of stakeholders, or the role of the local council, or the role of the individuals. It's in comparison to other things. So yeah, I think that's everything I have to say. I hope this was useful for you. I hope it kind of clarified your questions on them. If you want your AO1 and AO2 breakdown, AO1 is about 25% of what you're saying. AO2, which is your evaluation, your discussion, you're linking everything together, that's about 75% of what you're saying. So if you have an answer that you've already written, go through, highlight it, one colour for AO1, which is your content, and another colour for AO2. About 25% should be one colour for your content, and about 75% should be the other colour for your evaluation and everything else. So I hope this has been helpful. Do subscribe down below. I hope your exams go well. I'll be thinking of you all. If you want anything else, I can't promise it, but this was a request from one of you guys, and so I have done it for you. I can't promise it'll be the same if everyone else asks as well, but if there is anything pressing that you think I might be able to help with, do leave it in the comments below or drop me a message over on Instagram and I'd be more than happy to try and help. So thank you so much for watching. God bless, good luck, and see you soon. Bye guys.